Welcome to the Moxie Press podcast. Today, Jesse and I have a really awesome conversation with journalist Gina Tron, also a memoirist. We're going to be discussing her upcoming book, Suspect, in which she recounts the time that she was suspected of being a would be school shooter. This was in 2002, just after Columbine, just after all, anti-Matrix, anti-Marilyn Manson, just because people dressed in black and had black fingernails or wore strange makeup or strange to others, they were profiled. And Gina tells a story about how she was one of those people. And it's incredibly compelling. So you're going to hear an excerpt from that, then our conversation. There will not be a tag at the end of this episode because we're adding this on at the last minute, admittedly. So just know if you are an indie writer with progressive values and you want your work featured in our newsletter and potentially on the podcast, please submit for the Moxie Press Author Spotlight. We're doing things a little bit differently in 2025. We're going to be adding more spotlights to the newsletter, but still only doing one podcast a month. So if we get enough submissions, then we're able to vary things up and make it interesting. Otherwise, follow us on social. If you are somehow listening to this but you're not subscribed to the newsletter, subscribe to the newsletter. It's where we do everything out of. You need to be subscribed to the newsletter if you're going to be doing stuff with us. It's the best way. But social media, I almost said Twitter, not Twitter. We have been testing out Blue Sky, so look for us on Blue Sky. We like it quite a bit. Threads, TikTok, Instagram, all the usual places that are not ran or associated with a person whose name rhymes with Ron Dusk. So otherwise, let's do this. Enjoy the episode, and we will actually probably, we'll see you next year. So please have a safe, lovely holiday season. Enjoy.
Saturday came. Before dressing for a prom that I would not attend, I perused the day's newspaper. Another front page article revealed that on Friday, Spalding had been, quote, as normal as it could be. Mostly a rehash of the previous day's coverage, it nevertheless included a few more details about the security measures planned for the Elks Club. There would be a police patrol, and somebody at the door would check students for weapons. Later, I clipped the piece from my scrapbook. I put on my blue velvet dress, adding black fishnet armbands and elastic around my middle fingers. Feeling loosed from all restraints, I applied even more black eyeliner than usual. My lashes were black and thick, as if coated with tar. While I always made up my eyes, I noticed that when I styled them that way, the way I liked best, smoky or with wings, people got on my case even more than usual. But now that there seemed to be so little relation between my behavior and people's reactions, I figured I might as well do as I pleased. Mom walked into my room as I globbed black lipstick onto my lips. You know, Gina, after this weekend, you should probably tone things down, just to keep a low profile. I responded, but that's like giving up or giving in. It might make your life a little easier, she replied. I wasn't convinced. You know, I'm not one to hinder your self-expression, right, Gina? I had to agree. So can you please, for me, once prom is over, just go without black makeup and dog collars, especially no Marilyn Manson shirts, just for a few weeks. I sighed. I knew that Marilyn Manson concerts were being canceled, especially those scheduled anywhere near Colorado, out of respect for the Columbine victims. Tanya and I would later mock that decision, insisting that the lyrics to the widely adored pop hit Livin' La Vida Loca were far more disturbing than Manson's offerings. Quote, it will make you go insane like a bullet to your brain, unquote. Why was that respectable fare? Reluctantly, I agreed to do as Mom said, just for a little bit, even though I couldn't see what good it would do. I said no when she renewed her proposal to transfer me to another school where I could start over. My loyalty to Tanya didn't waver, as I didn't want to leave her behind. I didn't think she had the option to leave. I couldn't bear the thought of never seeing Evan again. In part, I didn't want to do anything that could be read as an admission of guilt. But there was more to it than that. The fact was, the whole thing felt almost good, like poking at a bruise. Mom drove me to Tanya's. We didn't talk. I turned on the radio. All Star by Smash Mouth was playing. It was probably the fourth or fifth time I heard the song, which was just starting to be played everywhere. A few lines spoke directly to me. Quote, well, the years start coming and they don't stop coming. Fed to the rules and I hit the ground running, unquote. I thought of all the years I was in love with Evan, all the years I spent trying to fit in. Then I pictured my classmates running, trying to dodge a rain of bullets. This is the fantasy that not only terrifies, but it secretly attracts them, I thought. Everyone needs a villain, and they made me one. Be safe, my mom said. Her green eyes squinted in sunlight that made them sparkle. I will. I love you. I love you too, Mom. Tanya was in her kitchen grabbing a soda from the fridge. She told me my dress looked awesome. She'd applied black lipstick, which made me happy. Confirmation, I thought, that the two of us were united in our status as Spalding's true oddballs. But she wasn't wearing any other makeup, and instead of her own prom dress, she had on a long black skirt and leopard print tank top. I guess she hadn't been able to bring herself to put on the dress when we weren't even going. My own disappointment was intense. I'd watched so many prom movies, and they all contributed to my vision of prom as a rite of passage. For years, I'd fantasized about a prom experience along the lines of Pretty in Pink. Now prom was here, and I had to admit that on some level it did feel like I was in a movie, but not a very good one. We got Tanya's mom to take our, quote, prom photos. Grinning, we posed with copies of the newspapers reporting on our ordeal. Then we were off for our prom dinner, quote, date at a cheap steak restaurant that was a fixture in town. On the way there, Tanya told me that her aunt's family was going through more or less the same thing we were. Her cousin, a senior, had been suspended after calling in a bomb threat. It wasn't clear if he'd been serious or not. I guess it runs in the family, I quipped. Tanya laughed and said the whole thing was surreal. I just can't believe it's happening. I'm really sorry you're getting the worst of it. I shrugged and said it wasn't her fault. I mean, it kind of is, she said. Yeah, I responded, and it's my fault for writing the Elks Club book. Let's just blame Sarah, we concluded. Yeah, if she wasn't so scared, like she told the police, why spread all those rumors? And a fucking fake hit list. We pulled into the restaurant's parking lot. Around us, classmates in long, fluffy, Easter egg colored gowns were floating into the restaurant. I noticed their hems dragging on the pavement. My heart began beating hard. I wanted to tell Tanya to drive back to her house, but at the same time, I wanted to leap out of the car and give my richly adorned classmates the scare they deserved. The urge to chase them was strong and new and surprising. To retreat or terrorize? Of course, we did neither. We went inside and sat down. Our faces stoic, we ordered steak. The waitress was rude to us, and at the neighboring tables, we could hear some of our classmates loudly debating whether we'd be barred from prom. Margie said that if they show up at the Elks Club, they'll be arrested or even worse, said a girl with auburn hair and an updo. Her yellow floral patterned dress reminded me of wallpaper. Hideous, I thought. If everyone was going to judge what I wore, maybe it was time for me to judge them back. I stared at the girl until her eyes met mine. Heart pounding, I winked at her. Her eyes got big, and then she looked away. She shut her mouth and picked up a fork, which she held awkwardly. I'd made someone cower. This was new, this recognition that I had power to do that to someone. It felt strange, but kind of nice. I was so used to cowering myself, being on the receiving end of others' intimidation. My power now lay in my notoriety. I didn't even know this girl's last name, yet I was on her mind, all because I felt I was infamous. When we got back from dinner, we changed out of our fancy outfits, and later that night, Tanya's mom took us to get ice cream, the supervised outing being permissible under the terms of our curfew. As we stood in line for our treats, people drove by yelling psycho and killer. We retreated to Tanya's and watched Practical Magic about two witch sisters who lived in a close minded small town. As relevant as the subject matter was to our own situation, I lost interest. Right now, real life was a lot more exciting than any movie. I felt like I'd rather rewatch the news story about us. After the film, Mom picked me up. At home in my bed, I lay awake. As I listened to the rain and wind slam the house, I couldn't stop thinking about prom. Were there really armed parents staking out the parking lot? Were Tanya and I the number one conversation topic? I pictured the scene inside the Elks Club with all the dancing couples. I'd always hoped I'd get to slow dance with someone at prom. Which of my classmates were making out right now? Who was having sex? As thunder sounded in the distance, I cried myself to sleep.
That was Gina Tron with an excerpt from her upcoming book, Suspect. Hello, welcome to the Moxie Press podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course.
Before we really get started, this is our first podcast that we've recorded since the election. So we just wanted to know, how are you doing?
My husband and I just moved into a house like the day of election. And so I will say I am very happy to be distracted by unpacking because I feel like the weight of it hasn't really sunk into me yet. But every time I look at the news and like read things, I just feel helpless and frustrated and distressed. So I think I'm okay. I'm good because of my distractions, but I'm just very worried and feeling really bad for especially a lot of my friends who are a lot less like a lot of my friends that are not straight and are like very, very, very distressed. And I'm trying to support them. And I feel very distressed, I guess.
Yes.
You're not alone.
You are not alone. You're not alone. We have the fortunate distractions of 3 children that keep us going, but it's been rough over here as well. Yes, but just wanted to check in with you on that one.
Oh, well, thank you.
Before we get
Of course.
into it.
But now getting into it, why don't you tell us a little bit, and our listeners and viewers a little bit, about you and your journey as a writer and everything?
So my journey as a writer in some ways really started with the contents of this book, where I got in trouble for writing a piece of writing that was a piece of writing. I mean, me and my friend also wrote a death threat, as you can kind of allude to in this book. Like that was not, it was more like a joke that was taken as a real threat, where this was like days after Columbine. We didn't really 16 years old, brains barely formed, not really understanding the weight of a stupid decision like that, but there was no like actual intention behind it. But the main reason I got in trouble in high school was because I had written a short story that came to light after that threat, and that people, the administration of the school and people at the school thought that this was an actual death plan. So this short story, by the way, had no like guns in it. It had like a monkey in it. It had all kinds of ridiculous things in it. It's a really bizarre story. But that short story that I wrote was 23 pages and it rhymed. And that was really my first attempt at like a real, I built like an outline. So in many ways, like I still use the process that I used for that story with like my books today. I always wanted to be a writer, I would say, but I never thought I could actually become a professional writer. So when I was a kid, I was writing short stories, and it was more of a fantasy for me. But I didn't think I had these skills. But even in college, I would shy away from writing essays for class. Wasn't able to like put my creative juices towards those things. They just seemed very separate. Well, like I would like procrastinate writing an essay for class, but then write a silly story on the side, and I like couldn't like combine work with that fun. But it wasn't until my like late 20s that I started realizing that after years of working in TV production, excuse me, I just realized that my true passion is writing, and that's what I like really needed and wanted to do. Sorry, I got something in my throat there. So I started just reaching out to magazines, seeing who would let me write for them for free or for very little money, and um, started writing like little things for fashion magazines or like blurbs for just like local outlets like that needed like a review of like a new boutique that popped up. And that kind of led to me writing profiles about musicians and artists. And that kind of segued into me doing some journalism, like pitching stories that were journalism before I really understood how to write journalism. But through pitching and getting pitches accepted, I did slowly become more of a journalist and write more serious stories on like the opioid crisis. I actually, me and another journalist or writer, we broke actually broke a national story on the opioid crisis in Vermont, which was shocking to us at the time that we were able to do that. And so, yeah, it was like a natural path, I guess, but through a lot of work and a lot of rejection. Um, and eventually started working for some newspapers, freelance, and then full time at one. And yeah, my first book came out in 2014. Um, it was another memoir. So I do write a lot of memoir, and I just always been drawn to essays and memoir because it's like, I guess for just easier because I'm writing about my own life, and I tend to dwell a lot, like a lot of writers. So overthinking things that I've done, and I feel like, a few people have made comments to me like, how could you be the age you are and already like have written several memoirs? I'm like, well, I think that like everybody has several memoirs, like several memoirs worth of stories in them. And I think that like, I don't think that I'm like special or that my experiences are special per se, but like I think that that it's all speaking to the human experience. So I like writing about the hardest times of my life, like this time in high school, and then my first memoir was about when I was in a mental health center in my like late 20s when I was struggling with like addiction issues and mental health issues. Um, and yeah, I wrote true crime for a while too. I just seem to gravitate towards some of the darker stuff and writing about, the darker parts of society and the darker parts of, I guess, me. And yeah.
That's great. I mean,
I love that. I love that so much. I feel like
Yeah.
I read some of your Vice pieces, um, and in one of them you were speaking about the uh, just in general how like sexual assault victims don't
Mhm.
feel comfortable speaking out as much, and I immediately thought of how many women I know that have miscarried and had stillbirths and things like that, and that now it's becoming more and more common for people to talk about it, and now that subject is at least being brought to light more. And I hope that we can go down the direction that sexual assault victims feel more comfortable sharing their stories as well, but just bringing out the darkness, talking about it, I think is one, cathartic for the person speaking, and two, cathartic for society, that we need to hear these stories. So thank you for sharing all of your dark stories. I particularly like them.
Thank you. And I agree, and especially with like, well, with so many issues and like including women's issues and health issues, like fertility issues, like the more we talk about everything, like it's good for things to not be so stigmatized. And
Yes.
yeah.
yeah, I'm totally with you on that.
Yes.
One of the things too that your piece just reminded us about was, especially in right now, post-election, and even pre-election, but just like in the immediate now, how the media reacts to certain things that have happened. So, in your case, after Columbine, everyone went so far into the, don't watch The Matrix. Marilyn Manson is bad. Little did we know he is like a bad person now, but like at the time, it was
I
you
too,
didn't have it.
I too was listening to Marilyn Manson
I
and
was such a huge
rocking a lot of eyeliner. So
but and like just how there always seems to be like not wrong, but like a focus on maybe not what we should be hearing or caring about. Like right now with like appointments, right now people are acting so surprised that Donald Trump is asking Matt Gaetz to be the attorney general. And we're like, are we surprised? Like, should we be sensationalizing this or focusing on solutions? And I just thought that was something that also like stirred up in me, like that period of time in our lives.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I think sometimes too, when I think of like see some of the things that people post online right now, like one of the like hysterical things that I see people posting is the whole fear of furries and like this fable of like the cat litter in the bathroom at schools, which I'm like, I'm friends with, I teach too, college part time, but like, I have so many friends that teach in high schools, and like, this is not a real thing that has ever happened in any high school. No school would do that. And this is like, but there's like, I'm seeing even like people that I thought were intelligent, like they're like, I didn't even think that they were right wing, but apparently they are. But I did think that at some point I thought they were like normal, I guess, stable, intelligent people, and they're posting like how, like in all caps, like, why are furries allowed in school at all? And I'm like, this is what you're worried about right now? Like some kid expressing themselves. And it's just taking different forms and I think that like that is also like, yeah, the certain media outlets are creating these fear that people that are already filled with fear and are not or and ignorance are just globbing on to these stories that are completely unhinged and not even real to begin with.
Right. Right. There's the distraction of fake fake issues.
Like sensationalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like let's feed the children. Let's get school lunches going before we worry about kitty litter in bathrooms.
Yeah, God, I know.
Do you think that ever, or has that ever hindered your ability to get like a story through? Like if you're someone who adheres to journalistic integrity probably more than a lot of other people, when there isn't something too salacious, is that harder for you to get something honest out there?
Sometimes, yeah, I've definitely struggled. I feel like it's hard when like you're trying to get stories out there before they become like a mainstream or commonly talked about issue. But if like that outlet's not ready yet, like you're trying to find like get into that sliver of time between whether the outlet is ready but like it's not really talked about a whole lot yet. And I had that trouble actually talking about or trying to write about IUDs, actually speaking of women's issues, like about how IUD insertion, like why aren't women getting pain management for that? And I had a hard time trying to get that piece to land, and I got it accepted in a much smaller magazine. And my piece didn't prompt other. I don't think it prompted the bigger pieces. But now, like probably like 2 years later, I'm seeing a lot that's being talked about. Like if I was to pitch that now, people will be like, "Oh well, we write about that all the time now."
It's old news.
So like, yeah, it's hard, and I do feel like one thing that has always driven me has caused a lot of stress in my life is that when you are writing a piece, especially as like a freelance journalist, is that you don't get to pick the title. So while I feel like some of my pieces have been, a little bit salacious, but like in ways that I feel like are to propel movement in a good way, I try to steer away from that. And so I have written some pieces that I felt were very solid, not not salacious at all, but then the editor or whoever it is slaps a really salacious headline on it, and I have no control over that. And I have been gotten some pretty angry emails before because of that in the past, and I understand why, because if I had written that, I deserved the hate. But yeah.
We did. It's like the editor's like one big, like whatever it is, like thing they get to do is choose the headline, for better or for worse.
Yes.
The incident leading up to your piece, you talked a little bit too about it earlier, but just so our viewers and listeners have a little more context, can you describe the sort of one, like the car incident with your friend? I assume, because you wrote an article in Vice where you kind of talked about what happened. You didn't use her name, but I assume this is the Tanya person who vandalized the car. I don't know if you want to talk about that, just because I think it's interesting to hear what happened beforehand too.
Sure, absolutely. So the person whose car we left a note on, her name is Sarah in the book. She was like, I guess, a friend of me, my best friend slash frenemy, as many young girls experience. for years, and she was particularly possessive and controlling, and you know, and so when our friendship ended, she was kind of retaliating. We're not kind of very much retaliating, and probably was my worst bully, and just spreading rumors about me even before before even Columbine happened. Rumors about, typical teenage stuff, like saying I'm sleeping with people that I'm not, or saying that I'm gay, and typical things that teens try to do to say typical, like it's okay, it's not, but things that teen bullies will do to try to, you know, take somebody down or diminish their integrity. And so me and my friend Tanya in the book, we saw her car there in front of us while we were waiting for Tanya's mom to pick us up. And this was like 9 or 10 days after Columbine. Me and Tanya didn't discuss, we never were like rejoicing, obviously, over this. We talked about, like, oh man, that's terrible that this happened. Um, but at no point where we say, "Oh, that was cool," or anything like, like that. But she saw the car, and she started writing a note, and the first one was insulting, but it had no death threat. And then she signed it actually with a name that was a character from the short story that I had written, and that was a short story that I had shared with Sarah, who had driven the car, whose car it was. So I said, "You can't write that. She'll know it's us." So that's when she, crumpled it up or whatever, and then she wrote, I'm going to kill you. Love the trench coat mafia." And all I was thinking in the moment was, "Oh, well, that's anonymous. Like, that's she won't know that's from us." And this is someone that was, bullying me on a very regular basis. So I wasn't like about to stop a note like that, I guess. And both of us, I don't think neither of us understood how much damage something like that could cause. It was like so spur of the moment. There was a bunch of other students around us on the stairs of the school. We weren't like trying to be sneaky. So she put it on her windshield, and then went on with her day. And like, um, in the book too, I like went home and I wrote in my diary. I'm like we wrote a death threat, LOL. And then I talk about some halter tops like immediately after. Like, I just did not get it at all.
Hmm.
It's completely was like unable to grasp what, like, the gravity of what we just did.
Yeah. It's that it's just bringing me back to that time, and just the lack of resources that we had as teenagers and young kids
Oh my God, yes.
during that time, and to process that. Like, no wonder millennials are the way we are right now, but it's just wild to put myself back into those shoes as an adult now, and remembering the jokes that were made, or not out of cruelty, but just out of some of them out of fear that it could happen to us, because obviously since then there's been far, far too many.
It's like we all didn't realize we were trying to cope.
Yeah.
So we're all just
Yeah,
being like,
we had no resources at
"Hey,
all.
death threat. Here's some halter tops." I don't know, like,
Right, right.
yeah,
And humor is the best well, not the best way, but I think it's the best way to cope in some ways.
Yes, yes.
I mean, technically, yeah. I think it just at the time, I don't think any of us knew why we were doing it that way, which I thought. And then reading about that initial incident and like the things around it, almost seemed, it seems at the same time foreign to me that like these days, unfortunately, like a school shooting happens, the reaction isn't as swift or as major because it's become normalized.
Mhm.
And so just hearing that like a note on a car caused like people to be like, I think they're people with guns are like like looking out for the Elks Club for these two like teenage girls. Like it just seems so. It's like everyone overreacted, but in a way, you're almost like, could we still overreact that way in some like incidences just to get people like a little more vigilant about what's happening? It's like only 20 years ago or something, and it feels so like another millennia.
Right. Yeah. Same. I feel the same way when I reflect on this, where it's like in some ways it's very innocent, like the
Mhm.
people's like
Mhm.
overreaction, despite like the mass hysteria. It's like kind of innocent in terms of like, you know, something bad happened, and now we have to like protect. We have to like search to see what the threat is, and that overreaction was like, definitely targeting the wrong things, like
Mhm.
goth kids or like uh music and just whatever ideas the media was throwing out to try to grapple with this big thing that happened. Um but yeah, in some ways I wish that, in not in the like mass hysteria way, but I wish that there was like that that these kind of incidents could still make the impact, that
Mhm.
heavy impact that this one did. Because like, um, you know, even experts I talk to about this, like mass shooting experts, they say that like this one, Columbine, like affected America so deeply, but there's been way more deadlier ones since then, and we can't even remember like the names of the towns of a lot of them, and then we're just become so numb, and I feel like we've just become, or we believe that we're helpless to this. Like this is just how we live our lives. Like this is just a threat that can happen at any school now without, you know, actual actions being taken
Mhm.
to. I mean, there are some actions being taken for sure and some research, but like not it's not being taken, I feel like, as seriously as it could be, as it should be.
Yeah, I think major incidences in general tend to have this like weird path to normalization. Like I was thinking about it with your story and with like something like 9/11. Like at first there's like mass hysteria. We obviously overreacted and started two wars. And just like, and then people started making movies about it.
Mhm.
And then people started just kind of incorporating it into like everyday stories, like incidences like it. And now if you like a TV show starts with like a terrorist attack, it's not like, oh my god, why are they doing this? It's like, oh yeah, no, it's an inciting incident to a story. Of course, of course they would blow up this building. Same thing with like Columbine, where it's like they had the reaction, then they made movies like Elephant and stuff, where it
Mhm.
was like, okay. And I remember that from being a kid, we all like went to see it because we're all like fascinated with that. And then again, like totally normalized. Then you see it with Donald Trump, and they just made the movie The Apprentice, which I think probably does a better job of like giving you like a less, there's still warning signs in that movie, but now we're kind of moving back into like this place where we're less surprised by things that we should be surprised by.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yeah, I feel like we're just like at a point where there's so many problems going on right now at once, and we're so overwhelmed and
yes.
feel, I think all of us feel so um spread thin
Mhm.
and like and helpless, really. Yeah.
Yes.
And yeah, I kind of yearn for that, like as terrible as my time was, I guess, during this time of this book, like I kind of am nostalgic for that feeling again, where like something like this could happen again, and that kind of innocence of our country where, you know, something like this could be talked about for months, and you know, people trying to figure out why something happened, as opposed to like us just feeling like collectively beaten down by everything going on, because there's too many terrible things going on and affecting us and, you know, our generation's kids as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's hard for people to figure out what to prioritize because everything feels like a priority to worry
Right.
about. And so we're
Yeah.
just like, well, maybe nothing.
There's so
And we'll just
many
sit here.
issues that we care about
Yeah.
that like to focus on one, then I feel like I'm neglecting something else.
Yeah.
It's too hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that way a lot, where like sometimes I feel guilty too, where I'm
Mhm.
like, just going ahead and living my life and trying, in the ways that I can through my writing to advocate for some topics, but then I feel like I'm neglecting other topics, or even like with my social media, I used to be a lot more like political and like a lot more but I just feel like sometimes it feels like I just feel so drained and like just having to try to take care of myself in order to, you know, live. And yeah, there's like this guilt where like I feel like, oh well, if I'm going to talk about that issue, I should probably like, yeah, it's overwhelming.
It is. It is. But the theme that we've seen through all of our interviews with all of our spotlights that we've had so far is the writing as therapy. Not negating actual therapy, but that using your craft is so helpful to process. So how do you think back then and now your writing has helped you process?
So I'll start the answer off by saying that I am in therapy and I love therapy. I'm a big fan of therapy, and I think it helps to have like someone that's like not like emotionally attached to your life, give you insight, even when you're in a good place, and then especially when you're in a not so good place. Um, but that being said, I feel like writing has been and the publishing and writing experience has been the best therapeutic tool for me, to the point where I feel bad for folks who are not able, or not to say they're not able to, but who do not, you know, have that outlet and do not have access to that outlet, because I don't know if I would be as healthy emotionally as I am now if it wasn't for being able to essentially process things in public and like connect with other people after having something published who could talk to me about their situation, and that helps. It's like cathartic, mutually cathartic. um, because a lot of the things that I went through, not just this situation, but a lot of the things that I wrote about, whether it be sexual assault or, the addiction issues back in my 20s, I felt, as many people who have been through the same things, very isolated, very disconnected, and writing about it made me feel less shame. Like it took the shame away. And not just, writing was like step one in the healing process. And then step two was getting it published and getting, really positive responses and having people tell me how they interpreted it and how it helped them. And so, and there was actually the this book, or like I guess I should say, the Vice story was optioned as a movie, which fell through eventually. But this was kind of a weird experience. But the screenwriter for that, we would talk like once a week for a couple months, and she was doing research to write the screenplay, which she did end up writing the full screenplay. But like me talking to her about it, and she had like obviously like a vested interest in it. That was like the best therapy for this situation, in like the weird. So like that's like a very niche thing that can happen, and that's like not, I don't know how to explain that. And like, yeah, the movie's not, that movie is not happening, but that was like an amazing therapeutic process for me, because I just was talking to somebody and they were like validating some of my experiences or thoughts, that made me feel less embarrassed, and like some of even like my darkest thoughts that I had, that I at first was like hesitant to put in the book or even express verbally to anybody. I feel like we're all human, and we all like, if you can think it, like somebody else has thought it too. And I think it feels good to admit something and like get somebody to validate you and say, that's not that crazy. That makes sense in your position. Or like, or I've thought that too. That's not, so I think that writing, yeah, it can be a tremendous tool for processing of anything in your life, and then also just helping you to connect with the world. Um, can just feel so. It just feels great. I love it. It's a gift. I feel really lucky to be able to be able to do that.
Yes, and you do it very well. Very
Well,
well.
thank you.
Um,
And also, congratulations on even getting something optioned.
oh yes.
That is hard enough in itself and rare enough in itself. So
Thank you. I have to remind myself of that, because like it's 'cause it was just one of those things where like when it happens, like you don't want to tell anybody, because like then people be like, well, when's this movie happening? When's this movie happening? And I have to, even though like these things, they typically fall through anyway, but like just
Mhm.
celebrating the success, and even the things that don't happen, or like things that get close to happening, like as writers, we're like always rejected, but I'm trying to celebrate like, oh, that was a rejection, but that was a nice rejection where they gave some compliments. So celebrating things that almost happen is like really important in a writer's journey.
Yeah.
Yes.
The little
Yes.
wins.
So I have like so many things I want to say. My brain's not working. I have mom brain. It's really bad. I love that you said that the first step to the process was writing, because we get asked a lot, like, how do you write? Like, what do you, and a lot of people say that know your audience when you write. And we say BS to that. We say write for yourself. Write the story that you need to hear first, because there's going to be someone else out there in the world that needs to hear that same story. So I loved that for you, that was the first thing, the writing it down.
Mm-hmm.
And then what advice would you give to other writers or authors, or even someone that wants to get into journalism, for like the process, or just maybe where to start, or just any words of advice?
I'll jump off from your point where I agree, where I say like, it will not come off as authentic if you're like trying to write for a specific audience. Like, or like being, or like, I think it's good. It's okay where if you're like trying to get like a certain piece into like a certain magazine to familiarize yourself with their style and like in that way, yes. But like when you're like writing about yourself, or like, I think essays, I think, yeah, just write from the heart, just write for yourself, and the audience will, it'll become clear once you're finished, like, where it should land, I think. And I think my biggest piece of advice for anybody is like, just embrace the rejection, I guess, because and because I know so many talented writers who don't really submit their work. And I feel like, so a lot of the success that I did have for some of my pieces landing is just because I'm relentless and I just don't stop like I don't stop submitting. And I just maybe in part from my high school experience, I can take rejection well. I can take, not that I never feel like I never take rejection personally, ever. And even, sometimes it does like hurt a little, obviously, when I'm like, oh, that would have been a great fit, I thought, for that specific magazine. Oh, that stings a little. Well, that's a bummer. But I never, will think, oh, I never internalize it and say, oh, I'm not a good writer. Oh, they don't like me. They don't like my piece. I'm just like, who knows why they rejected it? Could be personal. It could not be. It typically is not. It's like, probably just wasn't a good fit. Maybe they didn't even read it. Doesn't matter. It's out of my control. And I just, just keep writing, like don't stop. Even with this book, like this book has gone through, this is its third publisher. This book has had so many issues and so many hurdles. And I was tempted at sometimes to give up trying to get it published, but I knew it's important for me to get it published. And so I just had to be relentless, and in terms of like advocating for myself, not advocating for myself, but just there is a place for every writer. Like, obviously you need to work on your craft, and like, you can't just write whatever you want, and like you can't just write and like not polish it. Like, write, work on yourself, become a better writer, work on that simultaneously while putting your work out, trying to put your work out there. And I mean, I should show you my submittable. There's like hundreds, like literally hundreds of rejections. Like, and that goes with, if you're trying to get into journalism, just keep pitching. Like, you're going to be ghosted most of the time, or nobody's going to respond most of the time. But every now and then you will get, if learn how to pitch, and keep the pitches short and concise, and just keep at it. Like, don't give up. And I always remind myself, and I try to remind other friends who, are maybe struggling, feeling like they're not that good, or like they're not going to get published because they're feeling like the weight of the rejection. Like I think of Stephen King's like door of rejection notes. Like when he was starting out, like he got so many rejections, he like decorated. I could be misconstruing this a little bit, but I think it was like a door. He had so many like rejection letters that he like decorated a whole door with it. And, you know, a lot of literary agents or publishers, like just because they don't see the potential in your work doesn't mean it's not there. And a lot of these more quote prestigious outlets or publishers, they are thinking more like you said, Jesse, like the audience. They're thinking about like the audience. So like, oh well, like vampires were really popular last year, so we're looking more for that. But they're not really, if you are authentic in your writing and your work is authentic, I think that if you can get it out, no matter what, whatever the cost, like if you can get it out, it will touch other people. And I think that's, worth fighting for, I guess, not to be too dramatic, but I think.
I love it. Well, in that case, that's a great note to end on because it is worth fighting for. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes. Wait, before you go, tell us where we can find you, your socials, where we can get your book.
So you can find my book at whiskeytit.com. I think let me find the exact link. It's available for pre-order, but it's coming out on December 14th. And it's whiskeytit.com/product/suspect, or just go to my website, www.ginatron.net.
Awesome. And we'll link that as well.
Yeah, we'll link all of that in the description. But yeah, thank you so much. It was lovely talking to you. It was amazing.
It was really nice talking to both of you. Thank you so much for having me.